It's time for the Volquest podcast, where we dissect the biggest news items of the week.
Good Tuesday, everyone. Welcome to the Smoky Mountain Organics Volquest.com podcast with Rob Lewis and Austin Price. I'm Brent Hubbs. Glad to have you along with us. Don't forget about our friends at Smoky Mountain Organics, East Tennessee's most trusted health and wellness store, focusing on natural products and organic remedies to a variety of ailments. They've got 4 in-store locations to serve you: Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg, Sevierville, and their Knoxville location on Kingston Pike, just across from Trader Joe's. Or you can shop online at their website, SmokyMountainOrganics.com. Be sure and check them out. Hope everybody's having a great start to the new year. Lots of things going on with Tennessee. Tennessee plays basketball against Ole Miss. We'll get to that in just a little bit of the podcast. Certainly recruiting is on the topic of everybody, on everybody's mind as well. But before we get to that, let's put a bow tie on this football season, on this bowl game. Rob Lewis, 48-45 overtime loss to Purdue. Your takeaway from the bowl game, and how does that affect the big picture in your mind, in your opinion, of what Josh Heupel and his staff did in year one?
I mean, it doesn't really affect it very, very much to me. I mean, it was, like Coach Heupel said, it was a disappointing end of the season, but I just don't read that much into one loss. I mean, Tennessee, jumps out to a big lead, they lose it. I mean, I get why fans are critical and disappointed, but to me, it doesn't come close to, overshadowing the tangible things that this staff did in terms of, turning the page with this program and getting things going in a different direction.
What is your biggest takeaway of success for this season? Take away the wins and losses. What do you leave this season saying Tennessee was successful because maybe for this past year, and how it looks at moving forward? But beyond winning and losing, what was successful for this program?
I mean, this is like beyond basic, but it's just the offense. I mean, the way that Jeremy Pruitt, I know he wasn't the offensive coordinator, but the way that last team in particular, played on offense, the way they struggled to score points. I mean, how many times did they, Hubbard, am I remembering this right? They scored 20 plus 3 times in 2020.
That sounds right.
I could be wrong about that, but they averaged right at 20, and they almost doubled the amount of points per game this year to right under 40. And again, that's super simple and basic, but that to me is my biggest takeaway from 2021 is that Tennessee has played offense like a team in the second decade of the 21st century in college football needs to play it.
What about you, Austin? You've had a few days. I mean, I know we talked at length about the officiating. We talked at length about the bowl game following the game in our podcast and on the ride home and everything else. But 4 days removed from the end of the season, what's your overarching takeaway from this year?
I told you when you were talking about column ideas, it's almost like, the forest was burned to the ground and there's new vegetation showing through. I mean, it's kind of where I'm at. I mean, never would have thought that this team would be able to play the way they did. Again, I did predict them to go 7-5, but that was just based off the pure facts that if that team last year went 3-5 against the teams they were supposed to play, surely this team could, do that. And Tennessee could potentially win 4 non-conference games. Tennessee only won 3, but they won an extra game in conference play and went 4-4. So, but to do it the way they did it, and just kind of have some, just a little bit of juice. I mean, like it's something we talk about a lot, like whether it's in recruiting or on the field. They had a little bit of momentum once the season started and once they found their quarterback. And, I don't think you can talk about Hendon Hooker enough. The way he played basically all year long. He didn't play a great game in the Music City Bowl, but he still threw 5 touchdowns. I mean, let's think about where Tennessee's been the last 4 years before that. I mean, it was a long 4 years after Josh Dobbs left. So to have this guy come in and kind of steady the ship and be back next year, I think that's why Vol fans are excited.
What's yours, Hubbard?
Well, I think that they put stability in play, that they have an identity. You may not always agree with it, I'd like for him to be under center, on in the goal line situations. And there's some things that I don't just absolutely love, kind of what they do all the time. But my biggest takeaway from this year is at the end of the day, they exceeded my expectations. But the bigger takeaway is that you're walking out of this season heading into an off season where what this program's trying to accomplish. And how they're going to try to do it. Their identity. They are going to try to outscore people. That's not to say they're not going to get better on defense, because they have to, but what their identity is going to be. They're going to be aggressive, and they have an offensive, they're not taking what the defense gives them and that type of thing. I mean, they're attacking and they have an identity. And I think it's been a while since you felt like this program has had an identity. So that's my biggest takeaway, besides the wins and losses, is that there's a brand. When you say, what is Tennessee football heading into 2022, we have an understanding of what that possibly is, and what that's supposed to be, and what that's supposed to look like. I think it's felt like a while since we've known that. I mean, it's been a while since regardless of who their quarterback's going to be, regardless of who their receivers are, they have a style of play. And I think that's something that has been lost with Tennessee. So that's my biggest takeaway from this year, which leads me to this question. Does this feel different than does heading into year 2 with Josh Heupel feel different than heading into year 2 with other coaches? And
Yes.
Lord knows Tennessee fans have felt year 2s for a lot of guys moving forward. And why does it feel different?
Quarterback. It's as simple as that. I mean, Lane never got a year 2. Butch year 2 was still Worley. Jeremy year 2 was JG. So because of what Hendon has done on the field, that's why it feels different. They've still got massive holes to fill. I mean, right tackle is a massive hole, corner, safety, speed, linebacker, other receivers besides Cedric Tillman, and even Jalen Hyatt, who I'll give him that one because he's come on here at the end of the year and had a solid couple of games. But there's still lots of holes to fill, but you feel better just because of Hendon Hooker.
Crazy how the game's become so much about the quarterback. I mean, I know it's always been about the quarterback, Rob, but it seems like more than ever it's about the quarterback.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's been about the quarterback, like you just said, for a long time. But I mean, I don't think that 98 Tennessee team wins with T. Martin at quarterback in today's climate. I don't know. Some of those Alabama teams win with Greg and McElroy, and that's not even been 10 years ago, has it? Maybe it's not been 15 for sure. I mean, I just think the way that football is played right now, I mean, you've got to have a guy that can, throw for 300 yards or be a guy that can run for 100, or, a Lamar Jackson type that can do both. I mean, you've got to be explosive and dynamic at that position. I mean, I think the day of the game manager, I think that's gone.
Which will be interesting to see if Georgia can win the thing on Monday night. Their quarterback played better than a game manager.
I was getting ready to say, he didn't look like a game manager against Michigan.
No, he didn't. So we'll see how they play there. But the quarterback position has always been important, but it's so important. That's why every high-profile quarterback out there, Austin, is going to demand large sum NIL deals. I mean, if you look at, and I don't want to jump completely into recruiting, we'll finish up with football before we do that. But you look at assembling a football team, you got to have a guy who can play the quarterback position. You got to be able to protect him on the edge. You got to be able to rush the quarterback. That's kind of where you start, like an NFL franchise. That's where you start building from, and that's why quarterbacks are going to create the high demand NIL dollars out there in recruiting, because you got to have one to win, and that's the bottom line. If you don't have one, it's really hard to win big and to be successful. So Tennessee goes into this offseason appearing at this point that everybody, that the staff's going to stay together. There's a large number of guys at this point that are coming back. It doesn't appear there's going to be a mass rush to the transfer portal. how stable are things, and how big is it that the whole staff comes back if that's what ends up happening?
Well, I think it's big. I mean, it's not everything, but I think it is definitely something when you have common voices that are all back, especially at coordinator, obviously head coach, but, I mean, even at position coaches. I don't think every position coach you have to hear the same voice all the time, but, I think a core portion of them you do. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the stability, that's just something this place has not had in a long, long time. Look at Clemson, how much stability they've had. And all of a sudden now they're up in flux with all kinds of new coaches. And it'll be interesting to see, what all Dabo does. We know what he's done with his coordinators, but what's he do with these other position coaches that potentially have left or will be leaving? So, I think it's good for Josh Heupel to have the same group of coaches back in year 2.
Because it's year 2, Rob, is that what makes it vitally important as opposed to being year 3 or year 4? I mean, you look at Jeremy Pruitt's first year, he goes through an offensive coordinator change after that first year.
And a DC change.
Yeah, I think we could all agree that thing never got on track, in large part because there was too much turnover the first 24 months on the job, so to speak. I mean, how important is it for a young coach or for a coach early in his tenure to keep guys together? I mean, Sam Pittman's been able to do it at Arkansas and some other places. I mean, is that as big a key as having a quarterback in some ways?
I'd trade an offensive coordinator for Bryce Young, but I do think it's a big deal to have continuity. I mean, just like you mentioned, your takeaways, have the stability, and I think it's so much different. I mean, I think this is one of the reasons, if you're an athletic director, you hire a guy that's a head coach, because he's bringing a program with him, or he knows what he wants his program to look like, as opposed to Jeremy, who, no offense to him, I mean, any guy like that is going to be in the same position. He's learning on the fly. He's deciding what's important to him, what standards he wants to set, what he's going to emphasize as being important, what he's looking for in assistant coaches. And Josh Heupel, he didn't have a long track record, but 3 years is 3 years, and he knew what was important to him as far as what he wanted to emphasize within his program, and he brought a big chunk of his staff with him. And I think that's a big deal. To not only do you have continuity, you have a head coach that knows what he wants his program to look like. He's not learning what he wants his program to look like.
All right, last football thing here, not recruiting, but your 3 biggest question marks or 3 biggest things that need to get answered for Tennessee in the next 5 to 6 months.
Who the right tackle is going to be. Got to protect the quarterback, and then, what guys can they get in the transfer portal in the secondary?
I was going to say safeties.
Right tackle more important to you, Austin, than even secondary? You think that's the biggest priority, or do you think the secondary is a bigger priority? Or is it
overall, probably
1A, 1B, and that's it?
Well, because you could have multiple bodies in the secondary is most important. But, if it's just body for body, I think the right tackle is more important than one player in the secondary. But you could have, if you can shore up the secondary, then it becomes most important.
Yeah, big off season for that secondary for sure, for the development of Kamal Haddon, Brandon Turnage, Deshaun Rucker, obviously some guy, Warren Burrell, guys who struggled mightily in the bowl game against Purdue. And that's just the corners. That's not even talking about safeties there. So a huge off season for those guys, and a big off season for this program. The team and the coaching staff, coaches are working on recruiting with a little bit of time off here before they come back into the office and get ready to go back out on the road. Players are off until the middle part of January, when they will return and start their winter workouts and start the spring semester. We'll see who all comes back. It certainly feels like most everybody's going to come back at this point. And they're going to be an influx of a bunch of new players roll in. 13 new guys scheduled to come in. Throw Mincy in there, I guess. 14 new guys are scheduled to be in here for Tennessee. 13 or 14 guys, which are certainly going to be most important. And then the question, Austin, becomes who joins them? Who else does Tennessee go get? a lot of guys, as expected, jumping in the portal this week. We've seen safeties, we've seen offensive linemen, linebackers, we've seen all kinds of guys jump in the portal. We know Tennessee's heavily involved in a couple of guys. Let's start with Jared Verse and kind of where you think that one is from a timeline. I think you and I both feel like Florida State, Tennessee seem to be the top two. LSU's been kind of lurking in there. Timetable on that next week? In the next week, you think something's done, Austin, with Verse?
I think 48 hours.
48 hours. So
Yeah.
you think he's close in terms of trying to
close.
get to a decision?
Yep. I think it's some before the clock rolls to Thursday morning. I think Jared Verse is off the board.
And that's obviously a huge one for Tennessee if they can land that, because, Rob, that's defensive line help, that's edge help to try to get to the quarterback. As we saw in the bowl game, Tennessee has a hard time getting to the quarterback. They've got to find some bodies who can help them get a better chance of getting to the quarterback, close on some guys besides Byron Young.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything to say other than to agree with you. But we talk about how important quarterback play is, and one way to offset that is to have guys who can get after the quarterback. And there's no clearer example of that than what you saw Georgia do Friday night to Michigan. They come in waves. They don't have one or two guys. They have multiple guys that can get after the quarterback. And that's the antidote to that. That's a defense's best answer, I think, in today's game to the way things are played, is to be able to pressure the quarterback.
And it could be one of the biggest answers for Willie Martinez and his group as well. It certainly makes life easier in the back end if you can have some guys that can get to the quarterback. Austin, we know Tennessee's looking for a wide receiver in the portal as well. What else do you see? We hear a lot of names. Anything tracking really hard in the portal name-wise? And two, is there a shift in any position needs for Tennessee in the portal based on what you saw Thursday in the bowl game and kind of where you think this program is heading into year two?
Well, obviously they'd love to add Jared Verse.
Sure.
They'd love to add, a receiver, a running back, an offensive lineman, and then the rest, I think, secondary. So if you're talking seven spots left, then to me, I'm looking at, receiver, running back, Verse. Let's say Verse is in, even though he's not told the staff he's coming, and I'm not saying he's coming. I'm just saying let's count him as if he were. Devil's advocate here. So those three. Tackle would be 4, and then 3 spots in the secondary. That's not counting a guy like Ahmad Moten, who Tennessee would love to have and would love to take.
But that would affect the 7, but based on the numbers with the 85. So you got to balance an act there. You're not necessarily taking 7 transfers, but 7. We think 7 more players, total, high school and transfers, to be combined when you look at where Tennessee's at with the NCAA stuff, 85, and all those types of things. Running back,
that's what I was going to say. That would kind of surprise me a little bit. After they got Williams.
You feel like they need to go running back there?
I think they're taking a transfer running back.
Wow, if they can get the right guy there. So we'll see what names shake out there, what names don't shake out there. Again, more people are going in every day. But you got to be selective, right, Austin? You can't just – and that's the challenging part is you've got needs. You know what your needs are. There's a bunch of guys out there, but you're trying to decide, are there going to be better guys in there? Can I do better with the high school? Do I need to be patient? We know if they're leaving an SEC school to go to another one, it's got to happen this month, right?
That's correct.
Or they've got to be in the portal they've got to be in the portal by February 1st, right? Yeah,
I think the important thing too, Brent, is you can't wait. If there's a guy that you like, but you don't love him, you like him. To me, you can't sit around going, yeah, I like him, but I may need to wait on that after spring run. Because what if there's nothing then? If you need a guy, to me, you can't be too selective depending on the position. If you're just trying to build depth at a spot, then you're selective. But to me, you can't get caught thinking ahead to May, and then nobody goes in and you're left with nothing.
Yeah, it's a challenging balance because it's got to go quick here, Rob. I mean, you've got to. You're going to be back in school essentially before the dead period ends, or right as the dead period's ending. So, I mean, you got to go fast in a really short window, really tight window here. And I think what the interesting thing with that, Rob, is not only can you not bring him to campus, you can't go see him. So you can't even go size the guy up if you don't know who he is.
It's really tight. And is it COVID related? Why do you? I've got a kid that's a freshman, or a sophomore, and I don't know the answer. Why is Tennessee going back to school so late? I mean, they're not going. I think 23rd maybe is when classes start back.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer to that is.
I think that's a potentially good thing though if you're Tennessee, because coaches can go out on the road that week before that, and you can technically go see kids like you're talking about and get a feel for them. Of course, that still puts you in a tight window, but at least leaves.
And you could bring kids on campus that last week too. But I mean, you want students here. You want to be able to show them what the campus environment is about.
Yeah, I think it's a little different for transfers, guys, because I don't know that for some of those guys that part of it is nearly as important as it is for a high school kid.
I would agree with that completely.
Most of those guys have already seen the college scene and sort of know, when you have the job of a football player, how important the college scene is or isn't in a lot of ways, but still a tight window to make decisions in terms of getting a guy. I mean, you might think you're all in. Let's look at Jared Verse, for example. One of the things Tennessee needed to see, Austin, out of Jared Verse is they needed to size him up. Before Tennessee was ready to go and all in, Rodney Garner wanted to go see him. He wanted to go see if he was really as big as he said he was and as everybody said he was. And so based on once they saw him, they decided to go all in there. You don't have that window to do that now, particularly with some guys that you don't have a history with if you're trying to recruit them. So that creates part of an interesting challenge, and there are plenty of interesting challenges with the transfer portal, which has got a lot of people wondering about a lot of different things and question a lot of different things. I'm gonna close out recruiting. We'll have more in recruiting. There's not a ton of high school stuff going on right now. We're going to have high school updates throughout the rest of this week. Austin, you had a chance to visit with some of the top players in the state of Tennessee in the mid-state area. We already had the story up on Caleb Herring. We'll have more on there. By the way, I thought Aiden Bussell, of the guys you saw in Nashville, we saw in Nashville, no offense to all those other guys, to me, he looks as different as anybody's looked from one year to the next from a physical standpoint. Didn't you think just in terms of change? I know he's bigger than all those other guys, the skill guys you interviewed, but just the way he looked a year ago compared to where he looks now, to me, is significantly different.
Yeah, I mean, he's a good-looking kid, and so I mean, Tennessee's, I think the 23 class not nearly as deep as the 22s, but there's a handful of kids, especially in the mid-state, where I think Tennessee's trying to make some real movement. So, you look at, Justin Brown at Blackman, Aiden Bussell at Mount Juliet, you look at Caleb Herring, even going up into, Southern Kentucky, just across the line of Bowling Green, Christian Conyers, important guys, Shamar Porter, Tennessee's, Nathan Robinson. Tennessee's trying to make a play for some of those key guys in that mid-state area.
All right, before we talk hoops, last question, you guys, part of a New Year's resolution. You can make 3 changes to college football to improve college football. Who wants to go first here? What 3 changes are you making to the college football game? Rob, you want to go first?
I got 2 that I can think of without thinking hard. One of them is the injury stuff. Obviously, you got to some rule has to, for these kids faking injuries, with the coaches telling them to fake injuries, you've got to come up with some kind of penalty for that. The kid sits out the rest of the series, the kid sits out X number of plays. There's got to be something. And my second would be like the NFL does. They've got somebody back at headquarters looking at replays so that the refs don't have to go over to a monitor and take 5 minutes every time there's a replay. They got somebody at the home office, buzzing in like, you need to look at this, or, hey, you don't need to look at this. This is what happened. And because, when we could all see it at home within 30 seconds, it's ridiculous for a referee to go over and, spend 3 minutes staring at a monitor.
Austin, what are you going with?
Kind of like when you win the Masters lottery as a media member, you don't get to do it again for another 7 years. I think Saban's capped out if he wins Monday night. And
You're putting him on hiatus. That's rule number one.
I mean, a lot of it is all the the rule changes with the faking injuries and there's no easy way. There's no way to switch. I mean, like the transfer portal is easily becoming like where good teams go to get better. I mean, like that, and that no one's shocked by that. No one's shocked by Alabama or whoever cherry picking the best player from a mid-level school that they missed out on or overlooked go back in the recruiting process. So I mean, there's no way to fix that really. So and to me, it's just kind of the stuff Rob just talked about.
I think you got to throw the clock in there too, and do you need to look at how much going to more of the NFL clock rules, because even I know reviews take up some time. There's no doubt about that. Too many reviews, too many stoppages in play. You're still dealing with games that are produced that are 4.5 hour football games, 4 hour and 40-minute games. I mean, Tennessee had 18 possessions in regulation against Purdue, and Purdue had 17 possessions in regulation. You can't play those games without them being 4.5 hour games, 4 hour and 40-minute games. I think that's something that has to be on the docket of everybody to look at as well. So the clock would be, and the length of games would be the only other thing I would add to what you guys were talking about. All right, go ahead.
I just want to add a counterpoint to AP. I mean, the good team, the elite programs are cherry picking some guys, but I think the transfer. I mean, who benefited more from the transfer portal than Tennessee this year? I mean, if
Alabama, Jamison Williams.
You think Jamison Williams made a bigger? Would Alabama still not be playing for a national title without Jamison Williams? Tennessee doesn't win 7 games without Hendon Hooker. Well, Alabama could still win the SEC.
I don't disagree.
I don't think they beat Georgia without Jamison Williams because Mechie got hurt in the first half.
If they had Mechie, I'm saying. I mean, I think Hendon Hooker made a way bigger impact on Tennessee's team than Jamison Williams did on.
Well, Alabama. I think getting a starting quarterback is always going to be inherent, and is going to always be the bigger input or the bigger influx in helping a team. I think the point Austin was making, and I agree with what you're saying, Rob, but also agree with Austin's from standpoint. It's the cherry picking. I mean, the real talents. The real established talents that are leaving programs like Jahmyr Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs want to go play in a playoff. Alabama says, "Hey, come on." Okay, I mean the programs there are cherry picking, and I think the key word is cherry picking. They're not going to take 7 transfers or 5 transfers. I think from a quantity standpoint, the transfer portal can help a team get better. See Michigan State, right? I mean, you talk about teams benefiting from the transfer portal. There's probably no program that benefited more from the transfer portal this year than what Michigan State did with the influx of transfers they brought on. In terms of getting elite talent out of the transfer portal, the elite programs are going to cherry pick the elite talent. Which you would say the elite programs are cherry picking the elite high school talent, right? I mean, because to catch those programs, you have to hit on enough guys who were just a little bit of a rung below, right? That you can take and run with and develop, and they become big time players that help your programs take off that way. So I do think that the elite programs cherry pick, but I do think rebuilding programs benefit significantly from the transfer portal as well. I think the timing of the portal is a challenge and will continue to be a challenge. I just don't know rule-wise how you fix that, if you can fix that in any way, shape, or form. All right, we got to get to hoops here. Let's jump to Tennessee basketball. Rob, a lot of people want to know that last shot against Alabama, that last possession. They want to know more about where Powell's going to be. He's got to play more defense. Tennessee's playing Ole Miss. They're at full strength. Your takeaways from the loss to Alabama as they head into their second conference game here?
I mean, I get that fans were upset, but once Chandler and Fulkerson didn't take the floor, I thought Tennessee was going to get run out of the gym. I mean, so for them to show up and battle the way they did, I was impressed. I mean, I was really impressed with them. For the grit, the determination, and yeah, I get the fans' disappointment that they got into the final minute or final 4 minutes and didn't get it done. But to me, that looks like a team that's going to compete for the SEC title this year. The Justin Powell thing, I've got nothing. I mean, I have nothing for you. I asked Rick Barnes. I put his quote in the Monday 3-2-1. It's up on the side if anybody wants to read it. I asked Coach Barnes specifically, is it just about defense? He said it's just about defense. But to me, that doesn't explain Victor Bailey playing 20 minutes and Justin Powell playing 15. I guess some of that was Kennedy Chandler related. Maybe Bailey can do some things, that Powell can't do in terms of replacing Chandler, but I don't get it. And I've said it. I've said it before. I'll say it again. Coach Barnes knows more about basketball, or has forgotten more about basketball than I'm going to know. But Justin Powell and Brandon Huntley Hatfield will be playing much bigger roles for me. And he's going to say that Huntley Hatfield's not ready. I mean, my response would be you should have got him ready in November against USC Upstate, against some of these cupcakes. He should, in my opinion, should have been playing 20, 25 minutes against those kind of opponents, so you're not scared about playing him 15 minutes against Alabama.
Is the balance between offensive output or offensive production versus defense, is it different now in the way the game's played compared to 15 years ago, Rob? Or do you think it's always one of those deals where you don't necessarily choose an offensive guy? I guess somebody asked me this question. Maybe this is a better way to ask it. Would Chris Lofton had a hard time getting on the floor in this program because of defensive struggles?
Yeah, I don't think so, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean,
I don't know the answer to that either. I'm asking the question. I don't have an answer. I don't have an opinion, really. Because I think Chris was a better defensive player than he was given credit for by a lot.
I agree. And I'll tell you what, he was a really good team defensive player.
Right.
Now, I mean, you could put him, some quick guys could take advantage of him, but he was, and people smarter than me about basketball have pointed this out to me about Chris. He was great at knowing where his help was, knowing, where he needed to try and steer guys, what he needed to try to overplay. And Chris was strong too, man. I mean, he was really thick up top. I mean, he wasn't the fastest player in the world, but it wasn't the kind of guy you could put a shoulder into and get out of the way. So I have a really hard time thinking that Chris's career wouldn't have been pretty much the same no matter who he played for.
Right, I got you. It was a question somebody asked. I thought it was an interesting take, and his point was, Chris was about offense, and maybe wasn't the best defensive player. It feels like that offense is sacrificed for better defensive players at times in this program. And is that the way to be the most successful in college basketball these days?
And I almost kind of think it is. I mean, because when you look at, Arizona came in here a couple of weeks ago, averaging 90 plus points a game, top scoring team in the country. And Tennessee put them in a phone booth. Unlike football, I think good defense can beat good offense in college basketball. I mean, I don't know what Baylor ranked last year defensively, but I would wager they were one of the top 10 teams in the country in field goal percentage defense, your advanced metric stuff. Just because, it's simply, it's a cliche, but there are simply some nights where your shots, you're not going to shoot well. But you can play, defense is something you can control every single night out with effort and execution. And, even if you're Chris Lofton or JJ Redick, there should be some nights where it just doesn't go down for you. But you can guard hard. You can get up into people every single night. And I think I certainly think that's what this head basketball coach believes in. I mean, he likes offense. He'd love to score 90 every night, but he knows
he didn't want to give up 92.
He knows you got a better chance at holding somebody to 60 than you going out and scoring 90 in college basketball, in SEC play.
Yeah, defense travels, as you like to say, where offense can certainly be inconsistent. How big is it? How important was it that this team played the way they did without those two guys in terms of building moving forward? Because look,
I
mean, we're in a world where this is probably not going to be the only time some guys miss, right? That's just what we're dealing with.
Not.
You know, how big is it that Tennessee was toe-to-toe with one of the SEC's upper-tier teams on their home floor without arguably their two best players on the court?
I mean, I think it was big. I tell you, and individually, I think it was really big for Olivier. I know he didn't shoot it well, but he took 17 shots, and he took on the challenge, is what I'm saying. I mean, he was good defensively. He was good on the boards, but offensively, he did not shy away from trying to step up and carry the load. Now, he did do a great job of it. I mean, he had a huge three in the last minute that would have been the shot of the game if Tennessee had defended better in the last 50 seconds. But I was impressed by the way he didn't shrink from the moment. I mean, I kind of thought that he would. And, apologies to Olivier, but because there's been some games where he simply looked like, he was very willing to take a step back and play defensive rebound, but he stepped into it. I didn't think Ziegler played great, but I also didn't think he was rattled. I don't think he shrunk from the moment either. I mean, he had 4 turnovers, which were costly in a game that tight, but he didn't look like he was backing down either. And I think that's big for him.
Yeah, certainly because you never know in a night where Chandler's going to get in foul trouble, and can you create offense with Ziegler on the floor the way that they obviously did. They changed how they played. They created some opportunities for him to get in the paint, which is obviously his skill, what he does best at this point. Talk a little bit about Ole Miss. What are the challenges there? What's Tennessee need to do to get that first win, that first conference win tomorrow night?
Yeah, not just about Ole Miss, but the thing that worries me the most about this team is probably rebounding. I mean, I was really impressed that they held their own with Arizona on the glass. I mean, that was a big physical front line. Ole Miss is not that, but Tennessee's pretty low in the SEC in rebounding margin. They're down in the bottom third. I think they're 9th after this weekend. And it's like plus 4 point something, and that's coming out of non-conference play. You want that number to be higher. I mean, that's going to go down in SEC play, just because of the kind of skill and size we're seeing. So, not just Ole Miss specifically, but generally in the SEC, can Tennessee take care of their backboard, especially as good as they are on defense? That could be an Achilles heel. If playing 30 seconds of great defense means just absolutely nothing if you can't own your own defensive glass.
We'll find out if Tennessee can win on the glass. We'll find out if they can get their first conference win. We'll have full coverage of that Wednesday night here at Volquest.com. That's going to do it for this edition of the Smoky Mountain Organics podcast. For Austin Price and Rob Lewis, I'm Brent Hubbs. Thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, everybody.
You've been listening to the Volquest podcast every week here on Volquest.